Hi, I'm Iris, the host of Check the Silence, a platform where you get to meet people, projects, and ideas that have a positive impact on our planet, but are not often headlined in mainstream media. People who spend more time acting than speaking, projects that give you perspectives and ideas that become actionable insights. I have just started Check the Silence platform, and even if good things take time, I would love for you to review, comment, or suggest anything to boost it. Thank you so much for joining this conversation and the Check the Silence movement. Let's go. Hello, Ella. Thank you for joining us today. So today we are meeting with Ella Lambert, founder of the Pachamama Project, to talk about the solution she has put in place for an issue that cannot be much controlled, chosen, and sometimes even voiced by the people who face it. You might have guessed it. Today we are going to speak about period poverty and the Pachamama Project with its founder, Ella. In 2020, Ella Lambert, in the midst of the pandemic, decided to create a worldwide network of volunteers sewing reusable sanitary pads and to deliver mainly to refugees. Thank you, Ella, for joining this conversation today. And thank you, everyone, for joining it as well. Could you please share with us a bit more about who you are, what you do at the Pachamama Project?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, firstly. So as you just said, you gave like a really great introduction already, but yeah, my name's Ella Lambert, I'm 22, I'm a full-time student, and in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, when we all suddenly had a load of more free time, I decided to set up an NGO. And basically what was going on was I had been planning to go to Colombia that summer to go work on the Venezuelan border and support refugee women. And when those plans fell through due to the pandemic, I started to think of things that I could do from home. So I came up with this idea to grow a network of volunteers around the world. Well, it started off actually just three of us, me, my mum, and my best friend, making pads at the kitchen table. And then it just very, very quickly grew into this sort of worldwide network of people who are just doing their little bit at home and making a massive impact. And we distribute those to refugee women around the world who deal with something called period poverty, something that a lot of people actually don't know about. People can't afford sanitary products or can't access them for whatever reason and end up using socks, scraps of materials, really whatever they can get their hands on, which leads to infections, a lot of shame, people missing out on really important life events, but also just daily activity, education, things like this. This project endeavours to provide something which lasts 3 to 5 years, takes away that issue for people around the world, and just provides a lot of dignity and takes away a stress from people that are already dealing with so many unimaginable things that really just don't need another worry on their plate.
And congratulations for building such a big project. And especially, I thought it would be an older project, just seeing how big it has gotten over the years and since the pandemic. And before we dive in specifically into the topic of period poverty, what inspired you to create this project? Was it because you were sensitive to the issue, because you had read about it, or because it was just concerning you in general?
I actually hadn't heard of period poverty as a phenomenon until 2020. But when I was younger, I always dealt with the most horrific period pain, as in I would be screaming in agony every single month. I would miss out on school every single month for, 3 or 4 days. I would have to cancel plans last minute. And I remember being I wouldn't say I was ashamed of having a period. Like, I'm very lucky that I grew up in an environment where we talked about these things around the kitchen table. But I definitely didn't feel comfortable telling my school, for example, that I was missing school because of my period. I really do know what it's like to have to miss out on really important stuff and feel like you can't be honest about it. I heard about period poverty. It really resonated with me because for different reasons, people around the world are going through the same thing, right? Like, they can't leave their house because they're on their period. They can't go to work. They can't go to school. There's a huge dropout rate in schools amongst young girls in many countries around the world. 500 million women around the world are dealing with this. You just have to create access to products, and then this thing has just gone away.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can all do. So there's so many issues in the world which make my blood boil, or really upset me, and I have this real visceral reaction to other people dealing with injustice or dealing with suffering, I suppose. Yeah. This was something that I could do so easily from home, and the pandemic gave me that opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
You know, suddenly we had 3 months of like, okay, we can do other stuff.
Yeah.
And so I did, you know, borrowed a sewing machine, learned how to sew. And then when I realized how easy it was for me to do it when I didn't even know how to sew, I realized that there were people all over the country and all over the world that could also join in this project and take away this plight for so many people around the world.
It's crazy because it's your vision and your belief in the actual way that you could create opportunities that allowed the Pachamama project to happen. You were just like, if I can do it, everyone else can. I think it's amazing that you had this kind of collective thinking already just by being in your kitchen. You saw beyond your kitchen table and your own ability. And in terms of a rough timeline of your project, starting from the idea stage to it becoming a concrete, actionable project with a running website, volunteers, partnerships, how long did it take? Did it take one night? Did the idea took time to mature in your head?
I had the idea in March 2020, and this was before the official lockdown. Yeah. My flatmate was unwell, and at the time the government advice was that if you're living with someone with symptoms, then you should all isolate. So we isolated. We sat there on a porch, not being able to leave the flat for like 2 weeks in the sunshine, and that's when I had the idea.
Yeah.
And it didn't really materialize until the end of the lockdown because I didn't have time, because I was doing my online studies. But I knew this is what I was going to do. I'm going to at least make a bundle and send them somewhere to a refugee camp and see if they can be of use to people and see if they will actually work. But to be honest, at that point, I didn't know how to sew, so I didn't know how, you know, that it was going to turn into this. And yeah, at the end of the lockdown, we launched in August of 2020, and that's when I registered it as a community interest company, as an organisation. And the month before, I'd been contacting my local community saying, I'm setting up this project. I'm going to be making some pads to go to refugee women. Can anyone donate materials? And we had someone drop off bags and bags and bags of fabric every day for a month. And that's when I was like, wow, this could really be something, because we had this much support just from a few messages on local Facebook groups. What could it be if we got this out into the mass media? What could it be if we told everyone that we were doing this? We were just the three of us making them in August of 2020. And by 6 months later, we had about 800 volunteers. And, 18 months later, we've got 1,500 volunteers. And who knows where it can go from now. I mean, it is crazy when I think of it. Like, we started off just three of us. We've now made 60,000 pads. We've taken 6,000 people out of period poverty. We're working in 9 countries and counting. We've got registered volunteers in at least 14 countries. And I really just think,
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
You just say those random numbers, but they are amazing. And this is crazy. It started during your lockdown. Congratulations, honestly, Ella. So in which geographical zones do you work the most, and why? And was it because the outreach process was smoother, or because you decided to prioritize such zones?
The way it's worked, as soon as we got some media coverage, people started coming to us, because it's something that's not really spoken about that much, and because of the taboo of it all, people don't know so much about it. But I think when you hear about it, it resonates with you, because it's over 50% of the population who menstruate. And a lot of NGOs then realize, wow, this could really help. This could really solve a problem for us that we didn't even realize that maybe existed, because it's not spoken about. So we get a lot of messages all the time, and we have a waiting list of organizations that we want to work with around the world. We just don't have enough stock to support at the moment. The worst that we've sort of experienced is in Lebanon.
Okay.
And so we really prioritize Lebanon, and we every 6 weeks we send a shipment. We send a container of aid with our partners. We send about 14,000 pads to Lebanon.
Okay.
And there are just these camps, settlements, like refugee settlements, tented settlements, you know, thousands and thousands of people living in tents. And the thing is, that's combined with an economic crisis. And so even the Lebanese people are struggling to afford products as well, because they can cost as much as £17 for a pack. Yeah. Then we're talking about bread, the cost of bread being through the roof as well, and the cost of gas and everything else, your rent, everything. People just cannot afford sanitary products, let alone refugees who don't have necessarily a stable income.
It's great that to see that this network worked with people reaching out to you, but also you identifying zones that needed prioritization. So you also mentioned how menstruation could be stigmatized and being a real taboo in certain communities. I was wondering how you approach certain communities who might have a different view on periods, as there's a taboo around menstruation. Sometimes it's seen as something that should be kept secret. What's your take on it? And do you feel that the Pachamama Project can have a role in destigmatizing such taboo, while respecting the different cultures and customs as well?
Absolutely. I think the key thing is, especially in Lebanon, the taboo is huge, but the need is greater.
Yeah.
So we've come to a point where people will put aside the cultural stigmatization of periods because there are no other options. And also the stigma is worst if you're bleeding through your clothes and you don't have any products. And one of the ways that we've managed to tackle this is by having the people that distribute the products be people within those communities. You know, if I were to go and I were to distribute the pads, okay, maybe it'd be slightly different because it's my project, but it would feel like an outsider coming in and saying, I know what you need these pads you've never heard of before, right? And I don't think that would necessarily be the right way to go about it in particularly cultures where the subject is particularly stigmatized. And so, for example, in Lebanon, they are distributed by refugee women from the Muslim community. And we have seen like what I would call like a period revolution in this community. Like, honestly, it's gone from when we did our first report, after our first distribution in this community in the Bekaa Valley, we had a lot of comments being like, it's disgusting, like it's gross, like these kind of words being thrown about. I mean, we also had really great feedback. Like 80% of people were saying that they would recommend them to their friends and to their relatives. But we did hear these comments. And now, partially because of the escalation of the economic crisis, and also just because it's word of mouth, you know, it just spreads like wildfire. Suddenly it's just a completely different reception, and it's like people can't wait to get their hands on them, and they want to take more than one pack so they can take some back to their family members, and they've become the most popular item in the free shop. We can destigmatize this issue, like I know we can. It's just education, and it's just getting it into the public consciousness. And I also have a really beautiful story, something that I will always remember. I worked in Lesbos in Greece for 9 months, and while I was there, I ran workshops where I would teach refugee women to make the pads themselves, and then we would donate them on like a donation for donation basis, so the women could earn a bit of an income as well, in order to, you know, just a small amount, but just enough to have a bit of extra money in the bank.
Yeah.
And I was going into this center twice a week for a couple of months, and there were these teenage girls that were always in the center. And in the beginning, they were just absolutely disgusted by this product. Like, they were holding up the pads being like, they're disgusting. Like, you really wear those? Like, that's horrible. Like, they were screaming even at the idea of the word period. Like, they were hysterical, and they found it so funny. And just a couple of weeks later, I was in there making pads with some of the women. And one of these teenage girls who had been in the room when this was going on came up to me and said, can you teach me how to make them, please?
Yeah.
And she wanted to make them so that she could give them to her mum and her sister. She said that we can't really afford them as a family, and when we go to Germany, when we have washing facilities, we'll be able to use them, and we won't have to worry about this anymore. To have someone who was literally hysterical, squealing, even hearing the word period, to wanting to make her own pads for her and her family, within just 3 weeks. We can do that with teenage girls, you know, teenage girls who are susceptible to public opinion, in a community where it's not spoken about. They'd never been educated about periods. And they didn't even go to school because they were living in a refugee camp, so they didn't have access to it outside of their community. And I just thought, if we can do that with those girls, we can have a huge impact around the world, and we can change this. We absolutely can. And if we can destigmatize the topic, I genuinely believe that we can get rid of period poverty.
I feel that what's really, really symbolic and powerful is that the very object as a sanitary pad is already like a statement. So you don't really have to speak that much and to impose like moralistic ideas or like normative things where you say wear this, wear that, because women know what it is at a certain age. So yeah, when I ask you this question, I thought of running workshops on not how to make them, but more what is menstruation and kind of deconstructing certain myths. But actually, it already works just by presenting the product and like telling them that it allows them to have better hygiene, health, or more comfort even for themselves, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I might even say that it works better.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any stats on that or evidence, but from what I've seen, when you run these workshops, it's a creative, fun thing, right? It's not confrontational, it's not serious, it's not we're going to sit down and talk about periods today and we're going to educate you and you need to sit and listen. It's we're going to do this fun activity, and then conversations just come about naturally, and you end up chatting about your funny period stories where you leaked through on a bus, or and you end up just having a giggle. And it just takes the stress away from it, like something that has always been, even like when I grew up in the UK, and it was like something the girls were taken into one room, it would be like in hushed tones, and we'd talk about periods as if it was something disgraceful. And so then you always the connotations of periods for you then is always like fear and shame. And when you take it outside of that space and you put it in a fun, we're going to do some sewing today, and we're going to make something which is really beautiful, because the pads are gorgeous, like they're all different patterns and they're really pretty and they're really colorful, and there's something for everyone. And suddenly it becomes a joy, and it becomes something like to be excited about. And if anything, it's going to be something to laugh about, because it's funny, isn't it? I think what I really want to get across, we talk about period poverty and we talk about the statistics, and it's really important that we have that evidence and we look at it from an academic point of view as well. 500 million people worldwide are dealing with this. It's 1 in 10 girls in the UK, and one of the most privileged countries in the world. So then you start to think about rural communities in more developing nations, and it's through the roof. But what it really means on a human level is that you have people fleeing from Ukraine right now who are sleeping in the metro, and they don't have sanitary products because they've just picked up a bag and they've just run, they've just run. And what it means is you have people bleeding through their clothes in the metro where they're sleeping. And then because of the stigma, they don't feel like they can go up to people and ask for products. If you don't have the food you need, generally people are able to go to NGO actors and say, please, can I get some food, right? But people don't even feel like they can ask because it's embarrassing. And so you have people who, on top of everything else they're dealing with, they've had to leave their home, they've had to leave their husbands and brothers and sons who are having to fight, and they don't know where they're going to go next, and they don't speak the language, and they're absolutely traumatized and terrified. And then on top of that, they bleed through their clothes. Yeah. We're talking about people who are living in refugee settlements, living in tents, living in camps, who are having to cut up. We've heard of people who have received our pads now, who have started crying when they've received our pads because they were having to cut up their kids' perfectly usable clothes to use as pads. We have girls in Uganda where we work, for example, 60% of those girls in this community of 500 young teenage girls were dropping out of school or missing school on a monthly basis because they have their periods. So they're not getting the same education as their brothers are getting. They're then less likely to get, job positions that they want and progress in life. And then they're more vulnerable and they're more reliant on men. And then, we have a whole gender inequality issue as well. It's just huge. You think of period poverty, think, oh, they can't afford products. It's not just that. Yeah, it's shame, it's not being able to get on with your life, it's having contributing to the gender inequality issue. And it's just not something that anyone should ever have to deal with, and it's something that can be fixed so easily. You know, someone gets 8 of these pads and they don't have to worry about this issue again for 5 years. Yeah. And by that point, who knows, maybe they'll be in a better position where they'll be able to afford to buy products themselves, and if not, they know where to go, because we're still going to be here, we're not going anywhere.
You're staying. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those this story with us, and especially talking about Ukraine, Uganda as well. And it shows that it's not only like a material thing, but it affects like women's perception of themselves, as you mentioned, but their access to education, to even hygiene management education. And it's really, again, proving that period poverty is not only not having pads, but everything that surrounds it. So thank you again for sharing those stories with us. And now I feel there's an elephant in the room that we cannot really hide, which is the government. Do you feel that governments should deliver free sanitary products? In some countries, such as in Spain, there's less and less taboo in surrounding periods and women's pain during their menstruation. I've heard that certain companies have allowed women to take days off during their menstruation, which is another topic again. But do you feel that governments have a key role to play in this, or do you feel that it's a combination of civil society and the government that should act?
That's a really good point, but I do definitely think that authorities have a huge role to play in this. There's a really well-known phrase. I don't know who said it first, but it's if men have periods, sanitary products would be free. And I'm inclined to believe that, because toilet roll is free, isn't it? Every public place you go to, there's toilet roll. Do we think that if it was only women that needed toilet roll, there would be toilet roll in public places? Maybe not. And the fact that we do have this huge inequality issue, don't we? Like, where most of the decision makers in the world are men. Period poverty is obviously not on their priority list, because it's something that they don't experience, they can't necessarily relate to in the same way that women can and people who menstruate can. And so it doesn't necessarily come to mind. And I don't want to be like all doom and gloom, because I don't think it is. I think we're making huge waves at the moment. And I think this is really coming into the public consciousness. We've had a huge amount of media coverage, which I don't think would have been the case 10 years ago, because I think the taboo would have overshadowed it and people wouldn't have wanted to cover these stories. And we are seeing a lot more of that in the media. And, we are seeing policy changes as well. Like in Scotland now, period products are now free in all public places. It's government mandated. In the UK now, there's it's a flawed scheme, but there's a scheme all the same, where all schools have, and like education services have access to free products, which are funded by the government. And there's lots of schemes like this going on all over Europe, which I think is fantastic. And so I think we are getting there. And I think it is just the case that we just need people to see, because once you say it, once you talk about what period poverty is, people are like, oh, obviously, and once you say the stats, people are shocked, because you would never think that many people are dealing with something, because you don't ever hear about it. And I think just the more we talk about this, the more projects like ours and like so many others come about, the more, people in decision making places are going to start taking this seriously. To answer your question, I do think the authorities are responsible. I think that it should be mandated that all public spaces provide sanitary products for free, as part of, in the same way that they provide toilet roll, and then it would just eradicate this issue, wouldn't it? It just wouldn't be an issue anymore. But I think that it's always going to have to have a combination of things, because even if you get, for example, the UK government to mandate this and we have products everywhere, you can't necessarily guarantee that that's going to be the case in rural areas in Uganda. That don't even have access to clean water, let alone sanitary products. So I think that there's always going to have to be an element of civil society coming through and bridging the gap.
Talking more about the Pachamama Project and its model, what is the biggest challenge that you faced so far?
Shipping. It's a nightmare.
How come?
Because we are registered and we our main headquarters is in the UK, and due to Brexit, it has become an absolute nightmare to actually get the pads to the people that need them, especially when in Europe. We get hit by huge customs charges on the other side, but we have just had to overcome that by using our international network. So we just try and make our distributions as sustainable as possible. So for example, US made pads are distributed within the US. Pads made within the EU are distributed within the European Union, and then we focus the UK distributions on non-EU nations, which we already have those like long-lasting distribution networks. So for example, the UK pads go to Uganda and they go to Lebanon, and they will go to Pakistan next year as well. I always thought that the main issue would be the taboo and stigma of that. I don't know if it's that we've come at the right time or just that we found this really creative way to get people on side, but I think the fact that they're so beautiful really helps. Like, they are stunning, and so people just get excited when they receive them, and we haven't really had an issue where we've had to sort of win people around. Like, people just recognize that actually it's a really great solution and kind of get excited about how pretty they are.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures. They are actually like beautiful, you know.
I've got some here.
So yeah, they are so beautiful.
And all different.
And so if we want to join your network of volunteers, how does it work? And what are the tools we need from home?
So if you're interested in getting involved, all you really need is access to a sewing machine, whether that be at home or in a community centre at your school or college or whatever it may be, a bit of free time. It's a no commitment project. Like we say to everyone who's involved, whether you make 2 pads and never make them again, or whether you make thousands and you're an ongoing volunteer, you are just as welcome. And every pad makes a massive difference, because it's only 8 pads that sorts someone out for 5 years. So you can have a huge impact with not a lot of time. And so, yeah, if you would like to get involved, please contact the Pachamama Project at outlook.com. That's Pachamama for Pachamama. And we'll drop you an email with all the details. We've got a video, we've got picture instructions, and then you can just get going. We send you a guide on how to source materials for free from your local community, which is super easy. And then if you're based in the UK, we can actually provide materials as well if that's too difficult for you. And then, yeah, we'll get them to the people that need them the most.
Thank you. I'm sure lots of people will want to join it. I actually want to make some now. I don't know how to use a sewing machine though, but I'll learn.
That's okay. It's not difficult.
I was wondering regarding like how you plan to expand your project and develop it. Did you create partnerships with shops or any other charities, even in terms of fabric, for example? Thinking of creating those sanitary pads myself, I really don't think I have fabric available. Is there any way I can reach out to a Pachamama Project partner to have some, or is it on its way?
If you're based in the UK, we have a huge collection of fabric, and if people struggle to source it, then we can help. Abroad, we just don't have the infrastructure yet. But it's really, really easy to source material. This is the thing, like, they're made of a layer of cotton, like pretty cotton, a layer of towel, which you have at home, and it's embedded within the pad, so it can be secondhand towels, and then 2 layers of fleece. Now, the thing is, because it's a not-for-profit organisation, if you contact your local fabric companies and say, this is what I'm doing, is there any chance you can give me your offcuts, your end of rolls, a huge amount of fabric gets chucked away. If you're a local company, why wouldn't you support your local community, especially when it's having such a worldwide impact? You can also go to charity shops, and they can't resell towels, so you can pick up like bags and bags of towels to use. In terms of the cotton layer, like, generally people in your local community will donate like their offcuts, and you can even use like secondhand clothes. Like, I've made pads out of dresses that I don't wear anymore, and men's shirts make really good pads. So, you know, you can rifle through your brother or your dad's old shirt wardrobe.
This is a big level of progress. You take your male peers close to build period or something.
Yeah, exactly.
This is another level of progress. I was wondering, in terms of model again, how you function. Would you like to stay a non-profit, or are you trying to find some ways to monetize the activity for yourself to also fulfill your own needs? And yeah, for example, do volunteers need to pay a registration fee? You haven't mentioned it, so I don't think they do currently, but you know, in the future, have you thought of monetizing such activity?
So we're currently in the process of converting to become a charity. So at the moment, we're a registered community interest company, a not-for-profit, and we'll be registering as a charity. And once that's done, we'll be applying for funding from grants, from companies. We don't have any interest in getting any money from our volunteers. I think they already do so much. And I'm so grateful to all of them. Like, honestly, I've never been more proud of anything in my life. Like, we have this beautiful community of mostly women, but also some men, who are just like giving up so much of their time. You can get all the material sourced for free, no issue at all. But so many invest like so much money because they want to like buy the newest fabric. And in terms of my role in the organization, like at the moment, I'm a full-time student. I'm very lucky that I'm able to live off my loan and do this on the side and not take any financial benefits whatsoever. But once I graduate, at some point, I will have to either find another job and do this on the side, or make this my full-time position, which is what I would like to do for the most growth.
Hopefully it will grow big, and I'm sure it will. All the Check the Silence listeners right now, I hope you are going to share this project and help it make it as much noise as possible, and talking about issues that can be silenced. Ella, is there any issue, project that is quite silenced in the mainstream media that you would like to shed more light upon and share with us today?
Definitely. I, as I've mentioned, lived in Lesbos in Greece for 9 months, which is an island just off of Turkey, and it's sort of become Europe's ground zero for what is called the refugee crisis, with people arriving on the island shores to access Europe. And something which I had absolutely no idea about before I went, that completely shocked me, was that there's this phenomenon called the criminalization of solidarity. And basically what's happening is that there are huge numbers of cases in Europe in general against humanitarian workers, for doing life-saving work at sea, for handing out bottles of water on the shores to migrants who arrive in Europe. And suddenly they're faced with accusations from the authorities, and potentially facing like 25 years in prison, and accused of being human traffickers, of being part of the mafia network. This absolutely shocked me because I work in the sector, right? And I've been doing that for the last 2 years, and I had no idea about it, let alone the average Joe, let alone the general public who have never even heard of this before in their lives. And I just find it absolutely crazy that it's not all over the media. Like, why is this not all over the media? That people who are doing life-saving work, who are doing work like what I do, are suddenly, their lives are being ruined by having these charges put against them, by going through years and years and years of court cases to clear their names. So what is the motive here? Like, what are they trying to achieve? And I just think that should be everywhere, and everyone should know about this, and no one does.
What you shared with us makes me think of the story of Sarah Mardini. Sarah Mardini was a Syrian refugee who was in jail, or she was recently released on bail from prison in Greece, and she was accused of being a people smuggler after saving 18 people from drowning. Thank you for sharing what's on your mind as well. And these are tough, complex topics that cannot be tackled in one podcast. Those are systemic issues, and this is very important. At least the general public hear more and more about it. Thank you for raising attention on it, and hopefully Sarah Mardini's story has been shared worldwide, putting more pressure on authorities and their actions. Focusing more on the Pachamama project itself now, there's the throw a bottle in the sea thing that I've started now, where basically our guests, our silent doers, assume that there might be potential partners, investors listening to this podcast, and throw a little message in digital bottle in the digital sea. Ella, is there anything about your vision, your needs, your goals that you would like to share with them?
So our biggest goal, and it has been a main goal since we started, is to get Pacha clubs, like the workshops I spoke about that I was doing in Lesbos, in schools all around the country and ideally all around the world. What I want is to get young people talking about this issue in this non-confrontational way while learning about people around the world who are suffering with something that they maybe didn't know about before and having an impact, but really just breaking down this stigma. We can have an exponential impact. I think that if we can break down this stigma from a young age, then we can get rid of period poverty, because if people know then that they can ask for the support that they need, then we won't have this issue anymore. If there's any schools listening, any institutions listening, it would be absolutely amazing if you can get in touch and we can try and get a club going in your school, and I can come in and do a talk as well, and get your students learning about this issue. And then in terms of like investors and partners, I would say if there's any fabric companies listening that want to sponsor us and give us all your offcuts and all your end of rolls for our volunteers, not just for our volunteers to make, but also for our Pacha clubs in Greece and Lebanon, where refugee women are making the pads themselves to sell and earn an income. That would be absolutely amazing. We would be just so incredibly grateful for anything that anyone can do to support us, to be honest.
Thank you so much, Ella, for taking the time to join us today. I hope and wish you the best on this Pachamama journey.